And the stage is set in Miami, Florida. We are one day out from the first Democratic debate and what will usher in a new chapter in this already historic primary race. We have a lot to look ahead to in these crucial final hours before the first candidates take their places at their podiums. But first, the breaking news at this hour, and that is sure to be addressed on that stage tomorrow night. It is what is quickly becoming a defining issue for the current White House. That is the crisis unfolding at the border. Today, a major Trump administration departure. The Customs and Border Protection Agency's acting commissioner, John Sanders, resigning. This as public outrage mounts over what are being called inhumane and unsanitary conditions for hundreds of detained migrant children. His resignation following the alarm-raising reports about a facility in Clint, Texas, where a group of lawyers said hundreds of kids had been housed for weeks without access to showers, to clean clothes, or even to sufficient food. Just today, we are learning that 100 children have been returned to that same facility after being removed in the backlash that followed those reports. President Trump responding to the crisis this afternoon, calling for humanitarian aid and still pointing fingers at Democrats and at former President Barack Obama.
The conditions at these border facilities?
Yes, I am. I'm very concerned. And they're much better than they were under President Obama, by far. And we're trying to get the Democrats to agree to really give us some humanitarian aid, humanitarian money. And that is a very fair question. And I appreciate that question. But I'm very concerned. It's in much better shape than it ever was. A lot of these young children come from places that you don't even want to know about, the way they've lived, the way they've been, the poverty that they grew up in. But with that, if we can get this bill signed, we'll be able to do it. We have, the Democrats don't want to sign anything. And now I think they're going to probably sign this, from what I understand. I call it humanitarian aid.
And here to talk about all of this, Eli Stokols, a White House reporter for the Los Angeles Times, Democratic strategist Basil Smikle in Washington, Heidi Presbella, national political correspondent for NBC News. MSNBC's Cal Perry is at a detention facility in Homestead, Florida. And from Miami, MSNBC's Jacob Soboroff. He has been covering, of course, the ongoing situation at the border for us. Eli, let me start with you, because we just heard from the president there. He's talking about the situation in Congress right now, a bill expected to make its way through the House tonight, the Democratic House. There's a Republican Senate bill. We're going to see what happens there. But in the meantime, as all of that plays out and we absorb these reports from these facilities in Clint, Texas, and elsewhere, are there any other steps that the administration is taking, that the White House is taking, to deal with what the whole country's been reading about this week?
No, not that we know of. I mean, you just heard him blaming Democrats and saying that they need to come up with a humanitarian aid. The humanitarian crisis that's happening on the border is, at least in part, the result of this administration's policies and the president's decision to try to crack down on people coming to this country seeking asylum, to go out, to separate families, to house young children, to keep them in some of these facilities that are, by all reports that we're seeing, completely overrun, overcrowded. The conditions just really appalling. And so that's what's happened in the House. House Democrats, the progressives, have decided we don't just want to rubber stamp the Senate bill. We need to come in and we need to put some teeth into this bill so that the administration changes its policies in terms of how it's caring for the kids in these shelters. The problem is the Republicans run the Senate. They have a bill over there that has bipartisan support, and just a few days now until Congress goes into recess to sort of work out the differences between these two bills. So it's more brinksmanship as you see the conditions on the border affecting real people. And again, hanging over all of this, the president had threatened to start these raids again, to round up people, non-criminals who have gotten final deportation, final removal orders, to start rounding them up and moving them out. Well, there may be an issue operationally just finding beds for these people, given that all the facilities, the Border Patrol facilities, are so crowded already. But the president has sort of held that out there. He said, I'll postpone that for a couple weeks, he said, over the weekend, but only to give Democrats some time to come to the table. So he continues to try to use this as a bargaining chip, and that's just sort of the state of affairs in Washington.
So that's Washington. Jacob, I want to ask you, because obviously you know this border situation as well as anybody, and one of the things you've been telling us too is how hard it is for anyone, certainly on the media side of things, to get a look at what's going on inside these facilities. So we had all these reports in the last week specifically about this facility in Clint, Texas. Yesterday, we're told that a bunch of those children are moved out of there. Today, reports that some of them are back. Just in terms of those conditions, those terrible conditions people have been reading about the last couple days, do you have a sense if in the immediate moment right now, while all of this plays out in Washington, those conditions have improved?
No, we don't, because frankly, Steve, transparency has always been the issue. Where are the girls? Where are the tender age children? Those were the refrains from literally exactly 1 year ago, because we couldn't get inside to see them. In my life, I've only been inside one HHS facility, that one in Brownsville, Texas, where they were housing over 1,100 young boys, 10 to 17, and one Border Patrol processing station, and that is the one where I saw with my own eyes young children separated from their parents, sitting in those cages on the concrete floors under the Mylar blankets. They do not let reporters into these facilities lightly. They certainly don't let reporters into these facilities with cameras, be them video cameras or still cameras. And what I want to say is it is very unusual to have gotten the reports from these attorneys that were part of the Flores settlement agreement going in there and actually coming in and speaking out. You know that the conditions were dire if these attorneys were speaking out, because that's not their job. Their job is not to go in there and walk out and broadcast to the media what they are seeing inside. Their job is to go into these facilities and make sure there is compliance, and if there isn't, work discreetly to make sure that there is. And they were so alarmed that they decided to speak out to the public, Steve.
All right. So, Heidi, to the question then of a response from the government to this in terms of what's going through Congress right now, we say the House tonight, the Democrats in the House expected to put a bill through. Pelosi is sounding like she thinks she's got the votes. $4.5 billion. They want to get language in here that guarantees certain sanitary, certain health conditions at these facilities. Then there's going to be a bill, it looks like, that comes out of the Republican-controlled Senate. It's going to be different. What are the odds that in the next few days these two versions are reconciled and something passes here? Because we're up against funding deadlines here for HHS and for a lot of these services.
Right. Right now, that's a very big question here in Washington as to whether they can reconcile these, and not only reconcile them, but reconcile them pretty quickly, Steve. They've got 2 or 3 days, and not many of these lawmakers are going to want to cancel their break to deal with an immigration issue. So look to those progressives in the House to be partially mollified by this legislation that's likely to pass. We're told that Pelosi has the votes to now pass this House bill. In terms of the reconciliation, it's really anybody's guess and whether the president decides to put up a fuss over it. He wants to also change asylum laws. He's been kind of pushing for this broader immigration package. We're going to have to see him come back on that. But here's the key takeaway, Steve, is that even if this all works out and Democrats get some language in there, improving the conditions, putting some conditions in there, it's not going to fundamentally change what is essentially a pipeline from the border into these facilities of young children versus a pipeline into the homes of friends and family. And I think we have to keep explaining to people why this is happening for it to truly be addressed. And why this is happening is because it is not a bug. It is a feature that these children are being separated. I take you back to a year ago when then Attorney General Jeff Sessions said that this was going to be a good deterrent. Since then, now we've seen not only separations continue, but we're seeing situations in these facilities deteriorate. We're seeing no oversight. We're seeing the president say he's not happy about it, but it is a direct result of the policies in addition to the separation. Jacob Soboroff has done a wonderful job reporting on this about the metering that is forcing people to essentially not go through official ports of entry because they're being backed up, waiting for days in the blistering sun on hot bridges. So again, this was in its inception a feature. And here's where we are today.
Well, Cal Perry, maybe can you pick up on that and point and explain it? Because I think there's a little bit of confusion for me, to be honest, and maybe for some other folks out there. But my understanding, and certainly what the administration says, is that this official child separation policy that caused so much controversy last year, that ended. But now we are talking about this week all of these kids unaccompanied, no adults around, being held in these facilities. How are those two? Can you square those two things at all?
Yeah, it didn't really end because there are all kinds of ways that you can still be separated from the person you're traveling with when you cross the border. There's a lot of the government claiming they're trying to verify identities. What you have, and the result end of that, is you have privately run detention facilities and basically prisons like the one that you have behind me that has thousands of children in it. And these are kids who do have points of contact around the country, could be moved, as Heidi is sort of saying, to those points of contact, but they are not being processed out quickly. And to echo what Jacob is saying, there is zero oversight. We have visited some of these facilities, but we can't take cameras in. We are not allowed access to these facilities, so we're not able to accurately report what we know to be truly horrendous conditions. And to Heidi's point about metering, you're talking about returning people into humanitarian conditions that we just aren't really clear on. The situation in Juarez is very bad. It's getting worse. We're talking about thousands of people being released en masse from what are basically now detention facilities in the U.S. into Mexico, into a system that is also not equipped to handle it. So on this end, the humanitarian crisis is not just happening at the border. It's happening in these facilities around the country. You have this system that the president has very intentionally set up to basically spread fear through the community, but also to send a message to the world. And I cannot sort of stress this enough. The message that is being sent to the world when you put kids in cages and you stop the media from getting into those sites is that America is closed. And a lot of this messaging is working. It is making people afraid. And Jacob Soboroff has done a great job of reporting out the fact that some of these folks are trying to come quickly now to the U.S. and that the surge is actually picking up because of a lot of the rhetoric that we see not only on Twitter, but coming directly from the president.
I want to put this up from Nancy Pelosi again. We expect the House to vote tonight on this funding bill that Democrats are putting together there. And there's been some dissension among Democrats about how to approach this. Pelosi saying, according to the New York Times here, in a closed-door meeting with her fellow Democrats, a vote against this bill, the one she's putting together here, is a vote for Donald Trump and his inhumane, outside the circle of civilized attitude toward the children. Basil, again, it sounds like the speaker thinks she's got the votes she needs from her caucus to pass this, but what she's running into here are Democrats, in some cases, who they simply don't trust this administration. Right. They think if they cut a check here, if they put emergency money forward, who's to say how the administration is going to spend it? They want certain provisions included in this that, hygienic or health standards at these facilities. Some may be on the question of deportation. And then there's the issue of how it would be ironed out with the Senate. Do you agree with what Nancy Pelosi said, though? Do Democrats in the House need to vote yes on this today, or is that a win for Trump if they don't?
I actually do agree with her. And she was in Queens, New York, one of the most diverse, if not the most diverse county in the country, pressing her case with Congresswoman Grace Meng. So I absolutely agree with her. But I also agree with the theme that's been sort of echoed here among everyone, which is what will actually change, even if Democrats vote for this and even with the resignation that we've just seen. Because we have Donald Trump using as many tactics as are possible in his tool shed, if you will, to try to create this deterrence, to try to create this fear tactic. And now you have stories about African immigrants now at the border. You have stories about how older children trying to take care of younger children, and then they themselves can't advocate for their rights. So I don't think that much will actually change day to day, even if Democrats do vote for this, which I think they should. But I would also say very quickly that I think this is something that every Democratic presidential candidate needs to address in terms of how they're going to deal with it on day one when they're elected.
And I do expect we'll hear that question asked of those candidates tomorrow night at the debate. But, Jacob, let me get to you on that point, though, that Basil raises then, because, look, Nancy Pelosi is saying this vote, we're talking $4.5 billion here the House is set to vote on. That's some real money. And she's saying it's going to do something real here. She says for the children. She says it would be inhumane. You'd be supporting inhumane policies if you don't support this bill. She seems to be suggesting this money is going to have a real impact. Do you think it will?
I don't think there's any disputing, Steve, that they need more beds in HHS for unaccompanied minors that are coming into this country at record levels. But I don't think there's anything wrong with debating what a deterrence-based immigration policy really does. We've had one for 30 years in this country under both Democrat and Republican administrations. It's why it's completely disingenuous for the president to sit there and say this is in the Democrats' hands to pass an additional piece of legislation that's different than the legislation we're talking about right now that would allow the administration to indefinitely detain migrant families in ICE detention, as well as turn around unaccompanied minors and send them back to their country of origin immediately when they get here. That's ultimately what this administration wants to do. And we know it is a fact. There is data that is correlating to deterrence-based policies that show an increase in deaths of people trying to cross the border illegally the more you use deterrence-based policies. It stretches back to the Clinton administration. Literally, the policy was called prevention through deterrence. And every single day today, we're hearing news stories about people dying, whether it's in the Rio Grande or in the Arizona desert, because they're trying to evade the detection of the enforcement of this administration. And like I said, I think there's nothing wrong with debating how strong that enforcement should be.
All right, Jacob Soboroff, Cal Perry.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.